Welcome today to Railroad Design and Track Planning. You will notice as we're looking at these Google Maps of actual railroad spurs that they occasionally run parallel where the back of the industry is up against the main line or the branch line. But most often, as you can see here, they're nice broad 90-degree turns that takes you deeper into the town or city and to where the industry is at. So nice broad turns. This actually works out to our favor in layout design. And so here's a few different footprints, if you will, in a spare bedroom. Shelf, L, U, E, where each of these could have a nice broad 90-degree out into the island section. This is an example of wrap around the walls with islands or peninsulas coming out, as opposed to one big table that you walk all the way around. Normally today, especially since understanding customers and operations is primary in modern model railroading, we want to be able to operate, we want to be able to reach each of our industries in order to switch out cars. And so we don't want anything more than 18 or 24 inches away, arm's reach. We don't want anything more than arm's reach away. So we, depending how high your railroad is off the floor. I believe most of us understand that passengers want to be picked up at one city and dropped off at another location, most likely another town down the road somewhere. But let's consider freight for a while. Freight could be made up in a large yard somewhere and then blocked off for each town. So a number of cars are blocked off, and then when they get to that town, to drop all those cars off at that town, and then go on to the next town and drop off the next block, and then to the next town, to the next block. So where did they drop it off? If the town has a small yard, they can drop it off there, or it may just be dropped off on an interchange track. So this is a way you can consider these design elements to help you in your track planning. So take a look at a point to point. You can have a yard at the end on the east side, a yard at the opposing end, but yards are also space killers. One of the design principles that's been known throughout the model railroaders for decades is don't do anything twice. It doesn't make sense to do anything twice. So a lot of layout designers and planners are not going to have two yards unless they really want to. But you could have a small yard at one end and interchange tracks at your town locations if you have linear. For a single scene where you're only modeling a small town with a few industries or just one industry, the cars need to enter into your scope, into your realm somehow from the outside. And so you will have a track that goes to, from the modeling standpoint, seems to go nowhere, but it's a track that's coming in into your branch and then dropping cars off on a track, your interchange track, or 2 or 3 track. That interchange could be 1 track or 2 or 3. It's got to be enough to hold all the cars for your industry. And then you can have your local engine come and pick those off the interchange track and begin delivering them to the industry spots. And just if you only have one industry, you still could have multiple spots. And if you have two industries, you can have 3 or 4 spots at each industry, or and each industry may have a spur, or you can have one spur that addresses 2 industries and still have multiple cars dropped off. So what about yards? How do I design a yard? How do I do my track planning there? It goes all the way back to the first principle. You must know your customers. Your customers dictate your yard size. Each industry should have a track in the yard. So if you have one industry that could take 3 or 4 cars, you'll have to have you'll probably have one track in your yard for that industry. Your second industry could take a couple cars, maybe. You'll have another track for that industry. Your third industry, 4 industries, you'll have 4 tracks coming off your ladder. One for each industry. Of course, it's possible to have a longer track where you can block off 2 industries on one track in your yard. It complicates switching a little bit, but it's possible, and it may work for you in your track planning. But you have to have enough trackage to hold the number of cars, the maximum number of cars that could be delivered to your industries. And the other element of a yard, as you're planning, is you want to have a lead. That's a track with no cars being stored on it. As I said, sidings are for passing. Yards, you temporarily store cars. But even in yards, they're always dynamic. You're moving cars coming and going. They should be very active. But you're going to want a lead track that doesn't ever have any cars on it, so the engine can pull cars off, anything off the ladder, and switch back and forth the full length without having to foul the main line at any point. That we don't want the engine going out in the main line in order to do its switching. And if you have a fairly good sized yard, you could have one track for car repair and another track for a couple engines. And then how do we get back? If we do point to point, we're going to have to turn the engine around. If it's passenger cars, maybe turn the whole train around. And this is where, in modeling, we end up with, on one end you have a reverse loop, on the other end you have a reverse loop. We turn your whole train around. Sometimes these are referred as the end of line blob. You quickly realize they're space killers. A Y is another way to turn our engine or our trains around, particularly our engines. But also, Ys, although realistic, are space killers. And of course, another decision that has to be made is, do we want a continuous loop? Well, we can run non-stop. Just keep letting the train run around continually.